Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about from burnouts to breakthroughs, tips to keep creating, and it will be presented by Jaki. And before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items I would like to go through. The webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. There will be a Q&A session during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions in the GoToWebinar question box right away. Also, we invite you to send comments and whatever you guys want to share using the question panel. There's a chat, but we use it mainly to send information. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, not all the questions will be answered. We'll try to do our best. Many of you ask if this webinar has been recorded or will be recorded. Yes, and the recording will be shared on social media and will be sent via email to all registrants and attendees. The panelists for this webinar are Mario Quiñones, myself, and Jaki King. Also, for those of you who connect with us for the very first time or have never heard about Clip Studio Paint is your all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more at clipstudio.net/and graphicsly.com. Also, if you want to interact with us through Instagram stories, tag us as #webinar at Hey It's Jaki, at Graphicsly, at Welcome, and at Clip Studio Official. We'll be sharing your stories if you tag us. Jaki King is a freelance illustrator and designer and a Bostonian transplant in Vancouver. She's the creator of the comic Ladykillers, Abrams, and has previously worked as an art assistant on Lore Olympus. And with that, I will leave you with Jaki and her amazing presentation from Burnouts to Breakthroughs, tips to keep creating. Thank you so much.
Alrighty, folks. Whoop, hold on. There we go. There's the right slide. Thanks so much, Mario, for the introduction. And thanks so much to Clip Studio for organizing this webinar. My name is Jaki, and today I'll be talking about how to combat the cycle of burnout we so often see in this line of work. Apologies if I sound a little croaky today. I'm recovering from a bit of a cold, but we are doing all set, so let's get into it. A bit about myself. I'm an illustrator currently working in the comics industry. I make my own comic, Ladykillers, as Mario said, and I've also worked as an art assistant on other IPs too. So with that out of the way, let's start by asking this question. What is burnout? Merriam-Webster defines burnout as this, but this is not pertinent to us. It also defines burnout as the exhaustion of physical or emotional strength or motivation, usually as a result of prolonged stress or frustration. Now, I'm assuming that if you're here, you're an artist or a creative in some form or capacity. And if you're an artist or creative, you're undoubtedly familiar with the cycle of burnout or artist block. This phenomenon is in fact so common that there have been a zillion movies, books, and games featuring artist block as a central theme. Now, there are lots of reasons you might be experiencing burnout. To name a few, you might be overworked, you might be lacking inspiration, you might feel dissatisfied with your art, external stressors might be impacting your ability to create, and you might be overwhelmed by the endless fire hose of incredible art from your peers and colleagues that social media constantly pushes onto you every time you look at your phone or computer. The list goes on. Now, a lot of hay has been made over how best to combat burnout. See the aforementioned zillion movies, books, and games on this topic, but today I thought I'd go over more of a holistic, practical approach on how to navigate burnout and keep creating. Now, I've split this talk into two parts. In part one, I'll be covering a holistic approach to combating burnout, and in part two, I'll be covering some more practical ways to save time and energy, featuring a live demo of tools I often use in Clip Studio Paint. So, before we get into that demo, let's begin by looking at a more holistic approach to combat burnout by learning to love your art unconditionally and silence your inner perfectionist. Now, I realize this probably sounds like some feel-good woo-woo platitude, which it kind of is, but hear me out. You've likely heard the saying, Finished is better than perfect. This is an extremely important mentality to internalize, especially when you start working any sort of creative job and have to learn to work under pressure and with deadlines. This is also a really difficult pill to swallow because it often means that, what we turn in isn't our best work, either because we had to rush to finish it, or maybe we noticed some flaw in it after we've already turned it in, or, maybe your client just asked you to make it look bad. We've all been there. This dissatisfaction with your work feeds into the exhaustion and frustration that eventually leads to burnout. And as artists, I think we generally love our work when we know it's the best thing we could make, because it's easy to love something that is great. It's much harder to love something that isn't your best, but I think it behooves us to learn to love our work even when we know we can do better. Chasing perfection means you'll never get anything done. It's much better to learn to love your work, flaws and all, than to pursue a creative ideal that's impossible to maintain and leaves you feeling dissatisfied with anything less than your 120%. By contrast, if you love your art, the very act of making it will make you happy and will fuel your desire to make more of it. And making more art helps you grow and improve, which in turn fuels your enjoyment of making it. Rinse and repeat this positive feedback loop. This is how you break through the cycle of negativity. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying you should become complacent or that you should stop trying to improve. Loving your art and knowing you can do better are not mutually exclusive things. Just as you can love a person even when they're having a bad day, you can love your art even when it's not the best possible thing you can make. But as I said, loving your art unconditionally isn't easy, and it takes active effort and commitment and is closer to a learned, practiced skill than an intuitive emotion. But here are some ways to train yourself to love your art unconditionally. So let's go over some do's and don'ts. Don't compare yourself to others. Don't obsess over social media metrics, and don't engage in negative self-talk. These things are not helpful, and they will only fuel negative emotions about your art and your craft. Now, let's go over some do's. Do find your favorite part of every piece that you make. Do appreciate the tasks that you find the most enjoyable to work on. Find the parts of the process that make you the happiest to actively do. Do create things that you love. Do think about how much you've improved since the first time you picked up a pencil. Do forgive yourself for making mistakes. And most importantly, do slam dunk your inner perfectionist into the trash where they belong, because they don't have helpful, actionable advice. And as with anything, this gets easier with practice. So just keep trying and making a habit of loving your art and thinking positively about your work. Eventually, it won't feel forced and it'll come to you more naturally. None of the advice that I'm about to give you on speeding up your workflow or streamlining things will actually help in preventing burnout if you don't already have a good relationship with your art, because you're just going to feel resentful of putting finished is better than perfect into practice and creating art that you don't feel satisfied with. Remember, perfection is the enemy of progress. And so long as you love and accept your art in all its forms, you can ditch your inner perfectionist and have a more positive, sustainable, and long-term relationship with your craft. So with all that said, we've addressed how to have a more emotionally sustainable relationship with your art. Let's move on to how to avoid physical burnout by helping to streamline your process. Welcome to part 2 of today's talk, where I'll be covering some time and energy saving strategies to make the most of your time and energy. I'll be splitting this part into 3 subsections. Subsection number 1, using the right tools for the job, in which I'll talk about some comic making tools in Clip Studio Paint that I like to use to speed up my workflow. Number 2, cut your working time by cutting corners, where I'll talk about creating assets you can use again and again in your workflow. And number 3, making your art work for you, where I'll go over how to maximize the use of the art you've worked so hard to make when promoting your work on social media. So, moving right along, let's look at some of the tools I most like to use in my comic making workflow. We have multi-page organization tools, we have paneling tools, we have 3D models and assets, and adjustment layers. Now for this part, I'm going to jump into Clip Studio Paint for a bit of a live demo. And hopefully this does not completely ruin the display. All right, so let's begin by talking about multi-page organizational tools. So Clip Studio has a bunch of tools in the story menu that you can see up here that helps to keep your comic pages organized. And instead of having a mess of individual files with nonsensical names and a million folders containing a million subfolders, you can actually keep your work neatly organized in one place, and you can open this .cmc file to show all of the pages that you've made for a comic in one place. And you can also easily add a page, and you can even easily create 2-page spreads. So here are these 2 pages that I've just added by going into the Story tab and clicking Add Page, and by selecting them both and hitting Combine Pages, you can see that I've made a 2-page spread over here. Now, you can even do this thing where you can view the comic as a 3D printed object. So let's get rid of this page because there's nothing on it, which, as you see, it's pretty easy to do this. You can even do this neat thing where you can preview your comic as a 3D object, like a 3D booklet, by going into the Export Multiple Pages and going into 3D Preview for binding. This will sometimes take a minute, but it should take into account all the bleed margins and etc. Unfortunately, when I imported this from my iPad to my computer, I messed up the margins a little bit. So you'll see there's a little bit of white in the gutter, but it gives you an idea of what your book is going to look like as you flip through the pages. So you have an idea of, for example, what things might get lost in the binding here. And it's a helpful guide for how you want to lay things out. Now, this is for page-by-page comic formats. You can also do the same thing with webtoons. You can see here, this is one webtoon episode, and this way you can create webtoons without absolutely melting your graphics card by making a canvas that's 1,000,000 pixels tall. You can add new quote-unquote pages to your webtoon that don't force you to basically make this entire episode a single canvas, which would be wild. You can also preview your webtoon in its entirety by using the Clip Studio Paint Companion app on your phone. Unfortunately, I can't preview it for you here because I'm on my laptop, but that feature is great when you're stitching together individual files and pages so that you can ensure the transition in between different segments of your webtoon. You can ensure that transition feels natural as the reader is scrolling through it. So we've finished planning out the pages of our story. Let's say you're ready to start designating panels. Let's talk about Clip Studio Paint's paneling tools, which I find super helpful in making comics. Now, instead of doing things the old-fashioned way, which is to draw a square and draw a bunch of things in a separate layer under it and then crop the illustration to fit the square, you can really speed up the process by using some of Clip Studio's simplified paneling tools. So you can see here, this tool here is all the create frame tools. You can make a rectangular frame, you can make a polygonal frame, you can draw a frame using the frame border pen. You can also make a frame that's a bit rougher. Let's say we just want to make a rectangle. After you're done creating this frame, you can select whether or not you want, bear with me a moment. By going into the Object Select tool, you can change the color of the border after you've already made it. So I've changed it to red here. And you'll notice this frame, this panel, is already masked. So whatever I draw will not extend past the edges of the frame, which is very handy. And it is also already built into its own layer subgroup. Now, by going into the Object Select tool, you can also change the size and shape of the frame after you've already made it. So if, for example, you make a frame and you decide you want to extend it a little bit longer, you want to make it a little bit narrower, you can do that in post. It's very easy to change it on the fly. You can also change the color anytime you want. You can change the width of the border. You can also change the shape of the brush. You can see here I've chosen to make it sort of this fuzzy shape, but you can change it to be just a flat line. You can also change it to be a crazy shape like this one. So you have lots of options that you can keep tweaking even after you've drawn it. Now, let's say you want to divide the frame up after you've already made it. Let's go back into the cut frame border tools over here. You can divide the frame border by simply using this tool, and it'll just do it for you in one go. You can adjust how wide you want that gutter to be. I've made it very wide here. You can make it narrower. You can also divide this frame up equally by going into the ruler frame tool menu in the layers submenu, and then go into the divide frame border equally option here. This is super handy because the old-fashioned way to do this was to do a whole bunch of math and figure out exactly how many pixels wide you need to make everything along with the gutter. That's a huge pain in the butt. The other way to do it would have been to just eyeball it, which is also pretty tricky. This takes all the calculations out of it. So you can easily divide it into as many vertical and horizontal divisions as you want. You can also choose to have the divisions follow the angle of the frame itself. And by hitting that button, it has done it for you automatically. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So now that you've finished making all the frames, let's talk about how to draw the contents of your panel. So I'm going to talk about how to use 3D models to really streamline your process here. Clip Studio Paint has a whole bunch of different 3D models that you can use to help visualize a illustration. So I especially like to use 3D primitives to help me visualize an environment. So let's go into the primitives menu in the assets panel. Let's just drag and drop a couple of things in here. So by strategically placing a bunch of boxes and spheres, you can more easily visualize an environment or a sort of set and draw things in perspective without needing to go through the hassle of drawing your own perspective ruler, figuring out all the vanishing points. You can just drag and drop these 3D primitives in here. These primitives are also really easy to manipulate. As you can see, you can adjust the overall scale of something using this gray circle here, but also by dragging on these arrows, you can reposition them on the X, Y, and Z axis. And you can also skew and transform them by dragging on these boxes here. And you can also drag and drop multiple things into the same set so you can see how they interact with each other. So if you want to put a globe on top of this box, you can do that, and it's pretty easy. You can also, in addition to objects like these little shapes here, you can also drop in some 3D character models. So here we have a character model. Clip Studio Paint also has a built-in pose library that you can use on all your characters. This is, again, really handy for getting a reference for, let's say, something that's hard to get a photo reference for, either because it's at an extreme angle, or maybe, you know, you're looking for something that you can't easily find. Because there's this baked-in set of poses that you can just drag and drop onto the character itself, it makes it very easy to get references for whatever you're looking for. You can also download even more poses from the Clip Studio Assets website. Now, this set looks totally wild, but let me show you an example of how I've used 3D primitives to build a set for a two-dimensional illustration. So you can see here, I've put a character in here. I wanted to create sort of an illustration as though this character is sitting amongst a bunch of cakes. There are some candles. You can see there's some champagne. And this just helps to get a good reference for what these things look like in this perspective. And then this is what it looks like when it's done. You can see here that I've actually not traced the character one-to-one. As I was sketching this out, I thought about adjusting the character a little bit more to make it suit the perspective a little bit better. And I think that is the key to making your drawings that you use over these 3D models look more organic and less stiff, is to use it as a guide and not as a one-to-one tracing reference. But as you can see here, I've basically traced the cakes here, the champagne bottle and the glasses, but this was just a very helpful way to quickly put together a guide for how things should look. All right, now moving right along, let's say we've finished the illustrations in our comic. It's time to really zhuzh them up a bit, and in the words of your most problematic client, make them pop. And now I'd like to break out some of my very favorite tools in Clip Studio Paint's arsenal, which are adjustment layers. Now you can find the adjustment layers. Bear with me a moment while I go into the appropriate layer. Now you can find the adjustment layers under the layer menu here and going into the new correction layer submenu. And you can see here that there are multiple different types of adjustment layers. They're all great. But for the sake of brevity, I'm only going to be covering gradient maps today. Now, adjustment layers are, sorry, bear with me. Adjustment layers allow you to make broad changes to the look of your illustration without committing to merging all of your layers to adjust the color or the contrast. This is especially great if you are a layer hoarder like me. Put a pin in that because we are going to be talking more about that layer later. So let's open up this gradient map. So gradient maps are fantastic, where a gradient map matches every value on your canvas from lightest to darkest to a color in the gradient swatch depicted here. So let's make that clearer by changing it from a black and white illustration on a black and white gradient to a colored gradient. So you can add more colors really easily just by tapping on the gradient swatch here. You can also adjust where they fall in this swatch to adjust which values get mapped to what color. And you have total freedom to, delete, add more colors. You just have to click on the gradient map itself. Now, this looks crazy, but this is actually a fantastic tool for creating multiple colorways very quickly, or to get some really cool lighting effects on your, excuse me, to create some really cool lighting effects on your illustration. So let me demonstrate. You can have something that looks like it takes place in bright daylight. You can also go back and change it so that it looks like it takes place at night. Gradient maps are and adjustment layers in general are also great because they can do anything that a layer can do. So for example, you can clip it to the layer beneath, you can mask it, you can see it's already masked here, which means you can just erase parts that you don't want to have the gradient map applied. You can also change the blending mode. So this is it in a normal blending mode. You can set it to exclusion, which changes the way the gradient map interacts with the layer beneath it. You can change it to add. The sky's the limit. So this is particularly useful. Gradient maps in particular are very, very useful for colorizing a black and white or grayscale illustration. But even if you're already working in color, gradient maps are a fantastic way to create multiple different colorways very quickly. All right. Let's go back to the slideshow now. So let's move on to the next part of this talk, where we're going to be talking about how to save your time by, quote unquote, cutting corners. So I'm sure you've been told that cutting corners is a bad thing, and it probably is if you're a construction worker, but if you're an artist, you can really save yourself a lot of time and energy by making reusable assets for your art, and that's a good thing. So what do I mean by reusable assets? Here are some examples. You can make 3D models for the bodies and heads of your characters or assets that you plan on using. You can make custom brushes and 2D assets for components of your characters or your comic. I recommend reusing old backgrounds that you've already drawn and saving stock photos for photo bashing or for extracting textures. By making a set of assets you can use again and again, it cuts down on the amount of time you spend drawing everything from scratch. So let's go back into Clip Studio for another demo. All right, so let's start with 3D models. As we've discussed before, Clip Studio allows you to use 3D models, and they're a great time-saving reference. Here's an example of a 3D model that I've sculpted in a 3D program to use as a reference for one of my characters. This is useful, especially when you're having trouble visualizing the angles of their faces from an odd angle or in an extreme perspective. And let me just show you. Here's an example of how I used that 3D model as a guide. You can see here that I've kind of traced over it, and it helps keep the look of this character consistent, even at a bunch of different angles. And when I turn off the 3D layer underneath it, you can see what it looks like without it. In Clip Studio Paint, you can also save the properties of a 3D character model. Let's go back into the character, in the body type submenu. You can also save the properties of a 3D character model, which is very useful for creating a reference for your characters. You can see here I've created 3 different, oh my goodness, this came in very far away. This is especially useful for creating a reference for your characters. You can see here, I just wanted something that demonstrated the height and build differences between my characters that I could easily use as a reference. Now, you can go into the subtool detail menu and change the proportions. You can change the size and shape of the different parts of the body. You can change the height and the head to body ratio as well. And once you're done doing all that, you can save these settings as a character, and then you can reuse this again and again as a reference. Excuse me. Now, just as 3D character models are useful, if you have a recurring prop or set that you use in your comic, it can also be helpful to build it in a 3D modeling software and then import it into Clip Studio to use again and again. The way you would do this is by, let's say you've sculpted an object, export it as a .obj, and then you can import it by going to the File submenu and then going to Import and then hitting 3D Data. And using that, you can import a .obj file to use as a 3D asset. Now, let's talk about creating 2D assets. So Clip Studio Paint actually has a really robust brush creation engine. Let me go into the proper So you can see here, there are lots of different brushes that you can download from elsewhere. There are lots of, you can also make your own. So if, for example, you have a, sorry, excuse me. If, for example, you need a custom pattern, say, lace for a character's costume, you could simply draw it in Clip Studio Paint and then make it into a brush. There's also, so for example, my favorite asset to reuse again and again are these shoujo style sparkles. I use them all the time, and I basically just drew this, registered it as a material, and then made a brush with it, so that I don't have to keep redrawing the same shoujo sparkle effect every time I use it in my illustrations. Now, another thing that you can use to save yourself time in Clip Studio are other 2D assets. So, as an example, I've also seen some comic artists use 2D assets like this to make their comic. Here's an example that my friend Chris uses to make their comic, The Prince of Southland, on Webtoon. This is a library of heads for one of their characters. And you can see here, while the use case might not be perfect for every instance, using something like this, especially in the sketching stage of drawing out your comic, can really help save a lot of time even if you need to redraw parts of the face to make the expression match what you're going for. So my recommendation for this type of reference is to save it for thumbnailing and sketching so that when you actually go ink things in, the lines still look and feel natural and not stiff. So next, let's talk about reusing backgrounds. If you've already drawn a background in a previous panel, you can save yourself the effort of drawing it again by just copy pasting it into another panel. So let me show you what I mean. You can see here, I've drawn a panel. There's a very detailed background. I'm not going to bother making it again. I'm just going to copy it with Control-C, and then I'm going to paste it into this panel here. Now, obviously, this is zoomed in a little bit, so let's just expand this a little bit more. And as you can see, it still works great. I think, in fact, there we go. I kept the face. Now we can merge these layers. And if you're still not super happy with how this looks, let's say you want to add a little bit of depth of field, you can do that pretty easily by adding a Gaussian blur over top of it. Now, something I like to do is to create a quick mask, a quick selection mask. And let's say we just want to blur the bottom. I've used gradient to indicate the area that I want to be blurred at the bottom. We unmask it so that it selects that gradient, and we go into the Gaussian blur filter. And then we can just, you'll see here, it is only blurring the selected layer. There you go, some quick and easy depth of field. Now, another tip when you're working in comics is if you draw things on a vector layer, so this is a raster layer, but you can see this button over here will allow you to create a vector layer. When you draw things in a vector layer, you can resize them losslessly, which means if, for example, you need to make things bigger, you don't need to worry about any sort of, JPEG artifacting as you make it huge. It's a vector. You can make it as big as you want. Now, moving along to the next section. Let's talk about using stock photos. Stock photos are great for photo bashing. They're also great for extracting textures to use in your backgrounds. You can see here, I've just pulled a couple of default stock images. Sites like Unsplash or Pexels have a wide variety of royalty-free stock images that you can pick and choose from to make a background that suits your needs. So let me show you how I extract the lines and tones from these photos to create textures that I can use in my comic. So for that, we go into the layer submenu, and then we go to convert to lines and tones. You can see here, we've set it so that it's posterized, but if you don't want it, if you just want to extract some basic lines, you can get rid of the tones, and that will also make it just a quote unquote line art drawing. But let's say we want to keep that in there. You can adjust the thickness of the lines. You can also change the strength and adjust how dark you want things to be. You have a lot of flexibility here to change the look of these textures as you see fit to suit the needs of whatever comic you're making. And you can see after they've been extracted in the layer submenu here, you have a folder that basically separates out every tone, every value in this extraction into a different layer. These have also been set to have a dot pattern screen tone, but you can also turn that off by going into the layer property menu and unselecting the tone. So it's just flat color. So you can see here, this is the darker grays. This is the lighter grays. This is the almost white elements. And if you just want the outlines, this is it. Now, the nice thing about this method is, first of all, it doesn't destroy your original photo, so you can go back to your original photo and change it again if you want. But the nice thing about this is you don't need for the photo to be an exact match for what you want in your background, because if you extract the lines and tones, it simplifies things in a way that you can adjust and transform these textures to be whatever you need it to be. So let's say we want to have this wood paneling on the floor. It doesn't need, the wood grain doesn't need to match the perspective of the floor. You can just transform it to suit your needs. There you go. No need to go delving into those stock photo libraries for hours and hours to find wood grain at the exact right angle you need. Just do this instead. Now, with all of these techniques, it behooves you to save your layers. As I was saying earlier, become a layer hoarder, because you never know what's going to come in handy later. And it's a huge pain in the butt to extract things after you've merged them all into a single layer. Put a pin in that, because this will come up again in the next section, where I tell you how to make your art work for you and how to maximize the use of the art you've worked so hard to make. So we've talked a whole lot about how to love your art and how to make your art. Let's talk about how to share your art. Before we begin here, I do want to belabor a point, which is that social media can be a wonderful community building and networking tool, but it can also be a huge source of anxiety and pressure, especially when you're just starting out. It can be easy to fall into the trap of thinking that your work is only worth something if it gets lots of engagement. And while lots of clicks, views, and engagement can be useful in boosting the visibility of your art, it is in no way indicative of its quality or value. Remember, videos of dogs farting get millions of views. I promise there is no causal relationship between the value of your art and the number of views it gets. Okay? Okay. So with that out of the way, I wanted to share some tips on how to share your work online and how to make your art do more legwork for you. So number one is to get a good crop, by which I mean different platforms have different scrolling and browsing mechanics, and you want to make sure that your work is optimized for viewing on each platform that you share it on. Number two is to reduce, reuse, recycle your art, by which I mean you should remix and rearrange your art for short form video content and memes. And number three is to just repost your work, which is exactly what it says on the tin. Share your work again and again. So let's begin by talking about how to harvest a good crop. As I mentioned earlier, different platforms have different scrolling and browsing mechanics. So it's in your best interest to make your work easy to view on each platform that you share it on. So let me show you what I mean. Here's a panel for my comic Ladykillers. And here is how I've optimized it for viewing on Instagram, which has a horizontal sliding browsing feature. You'll see how I've cut the panel up into multiple slides that the viewer can scroll across horizontally. Slide number 1, slide number 2. By contrast, here's how it looks on Webtoon, where I've optimized it for viewing in a vertical scrolling format. There's no slides, but I've also rotated it 90 degrees so it's still easy to read and view when scrolling vertically. See how if I were to keep it in the same orientation as an Instagram, the panel becomes really tiny and you lose a lot of the impact? When I planned out the composition of this panel, I specifically put it at an angle so that it could be rotated to 90 degrees and still look good. So let me show you another example of how I made this work. Here's another comic I drew, some fan art for Dragon Age the Veilguard. You might already know I'm a fangirl. You can see how in its original format here, I've created it as though it were a traditional page-by-page comic. This aspect ratio isn't great for Instagram, which I guess now allows you to share longer portrait mode images, but historically, Instagram has favored a square shape. So the way I addressed that problem was to rearrange the panels that worked in a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, like this. Note that this would not have been possible, or would at least have been an enormous pain in my butt if I had merged all my layers when I finished illustrating the page. So hoard those layers. You never know when you might need to separate out a panel, or even a character within a panel, as a transparent PNG. So speaking of reusing and remixing your work, let's talk about how to recycle your art to make new content for your socials, because for many platforms, there's a real incentive to post frequently, ideally daily, to keep those engagement rates and metrics up. This is a fast way to burn yourself out if you are literally trying to put up new art every day or every month or every week. So what do you do instead? You remix the art you've already made into new content. So memes, short form video content, and other low effort but high fun posts are all a great way to reuse your art and keep your socials active, even when you aren't making anything new at the moment. This is a great way to, 1, give yourself an excuse to read through some silly memes, which I always love. 2, give people a second chance to look at your art in a different context. And 3, goof around with your friends and followers, which incidentally is also a great way to build engagement. So for this type of content, I encourage you to find a format that just feels the most fun for you. Again, the idea is to keep it low pressure and fun. You don't want to add more busy work to your to-do list. You want to just make more things that you enjoy. So memes, short form video, just find something that you like to make. Any excuse you can get to show people your work is a good one, which brings us to our final point, which is to repost your work. It is never too early to repost your work because so many social media platforms are now algorithm-based, which means that a lot of your followers might not have seen your work the first time you posted it. Not to mention, each time you share your art, it might also be viewed by a bunch of new people too. So if you need some ways to justify reposting your art, you can share some detailed shots. You can share some work in progress stills or some work in progress shots of it as you're making it. You can share it alongside other pieces you're proud of. You can share it alongside other pieces with a similar theme or color palette. Just share it again. I'm really not joking. Share it again. Because you've spent hours making something that you love, you should share it again and again. And you should keep sharing it for as long as it makes you happy. So that just about wraps up all the points I was hoping to cover. We've discussed how to address the emotional aspects of burnout, as well as how to stave off some of the physical stressors that contribute to it. And we've covered a lot of ground today, but if there's any one thing I want you to take away from the talk, it's this, which is love your art unconditionally in all its forms, regardless of how good or bad it might seem to you. There will always be deadlines or other external pressures that add stress to your life and your workflow, so don't let your own perfectionism ruin your love of the craft. Combating burnout is an ongoing act, and while you can stave it off by employing energy or time-saving techniques, the only way to truly break the cycle of negativity is to learn to love your work. And that concludes this talk. thank you guys so much for listening to me drone on and on. I'll send it back to Mario for the Q&A portion.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for this amazing presentation. I will give you some time now to get a glass of water and rest a bit. I know there was a lot of content to share. Thank you so much for
Yes, I
summarizing
realized this
this.
was a bit of a, drinking from a fire hose for everybody. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer.
So also we want to thank all of you who joined us live. We asked from which part of the world were you watching us. For example, Kuro from Germany, Daphne, UK, Texas, Arman, Bolivia, Martha, who else? Canada, Dana, Croatia, Aaron, Germany, Katja, Africa, C. What else? Norway, Ingrid, Hungary, Rixa, sorry if I mispronounced it, etc., Romania, etc., etc. Thank all of you who are watching us live, who are watching the recording. Some of you ask if this webinar has been recorded. Yes, we are recording it and we'll be sharing on Graphicsly YouTube. So please subscribe to get a notification once the video is available. And thank you, Colombia. Now that people is writing, Iran. Thank all of you. The first question is, how do you deal with when you get a blank, when you are not in the mood to create your own artwork? How do you deal with that day if it happens?
So oftentimes when I'm drawing a blank, I think there's like a two-pronged approach on how you can, get over the anxiety of a blank canvas. And approach number one is to just start drawing something. This is what I like to call the brute force method, which is you have a blank canvas and I will just do anything to make it not blank anymore. I'll just start drawing, and even if I don't like it, I'll delete it, I'll start over and just keep at it until you start making something that feels right. The other thing that I do if I'm feeling, particularly exhausted, if I'm not feeling inspired, is I'll often go, I'll go and look at things that inspire me. Sometimes that's looking at, my friends' art, that's looking at art that I really love, but sometimes that's also taking a break to read a book or watch a movie or play a game that I find particularly inspiring for my art. And then finally, if you are looking at a blank canvas and truly just not sure how to proceed, you can always take a break. Get some food, drink some water, make sure you are feeling rested, because exhaustion can also feed into burnout, obviously, and it certainly doesn't help. So yeah, 3 different approaches.
And James asked if you have like daily practice exercises.
Do I do daily practice exercises?
Yes.
I do. I don't do as many warm-up exercises as I should. I feel like, there are many days that I just try to jump right into it. But oftentimes, if I'm feeling uninspired, studies are actually also a great way to just sort of get the creative juices flowing again. And I think studies don't always have to be boring or, rote. You can just draw something. It can just be as simple as drawing something you like to draw, and drawing it again and again until it feels right, until it feels natural. But yeah, I would say that I don't practice as much as I should, but that is also something that I do.
And here's a comment from Anastasia. Thank you for this webinar. Your work is amazing. I love your tips you gave. I always struggle with self-criticism and comparing myself with others. You helped me a lot today. And a question, do you have any suggestions for tools to create your own 3D materials?
Suggestions for tools on creating your own 3D materials. I mean, step 1 is to get a 3D program. There are a couple of options available. I've previously used Blender and Nomad on my iPad. Nomad is great for sculpting. Blender, I'm still learning, but that one I've used to make like sets. But I think the best tip I have for working in 3D is to just keep trying. I think for a lot of illustrators, sculpting is going to feel a lot more intuitive than modeling. I'm still a newbie at that, so I don't really have any actionable advice on how to get better at modeling because I am also trying to get better at modeling. But sculpting, I think, will feel very intuitive for a lot of illustrators because it's a lot of the same tool sets. You're still using like a brush to sort of push and pull what feels like to me a like ball of clay around, which I think to a lot of illustrators will feel more intuitive. So yeah, step 0, get yourself a 3D program. Step 1, just start messing around in it.
And also a question from Inkira. What's the best advice you will give to an artist who is still new to webtoon creation?
Someone who's new to webtoon creation, just make your webtoon. I think a lot of people get psyched out at the start because it's daunting. Starting a new project is always daunting, no matter what that project is. It's the anxiety of looking at a blank canvas. So the best thing you can do as a newbie is to just start making it. I think there is sometimes an inclination to like, oh, I want to wait until I'm good enough to make it. Don't do that. You're already good enough. Just start making it. And also, the nice thing about long form comics in general is that the very act of working on it will make you better. You will improve a lot just by drawing your comic. And I think part of the joy of reading or following someone who's making a long form webcomic is seeing them grow and change over the years. So yeah, my advice to you is just start doing it and keep it fun. Keep it fun for you.
For sure. And there's a question from Khalil. Hey Jackie, follow your work for ages. Thanks for the talk. Any tips on how you manage your production schedule for your webtoon alongside all of your other work jobs?
Gosh, this is a great question, and I worry that my answer is not the best one. But for me personally, I think freelancers can all relate to the problem of you are juggling many projects all the time, forever. For me, something that's helped a lot is writing a to-do list every morning, and my to-do list is always aspirational. I write a bunch of things. Like if I write 8 things, I will be delighted if I get 3 of them done. But the act of writing out the to-do list daily helps keep me on top of things that I might otherwise forget to work on. But yeah, managing several projects is basically, I mean, I think a lot of us learn on the fly how to do it, but just keeping all of them on your radar by writing them down helps a lot. That's unfortunately for managing actual workload, that's, I think, a much more difficult question to answer because I haven't figured that one out myself. I think freelance comes with a lot of, it never rains, but it pours. There are busy seasons, and then there are seasons that feel a lot emptier. And I think you just kind of have to figure out what your upper limit is for how much work you can take on that won't make you crazy, and be very good about enforcing your boundaries about not accepting more work than you are comfortable doing. Hopefully that helps.
For sure. And this is a question from Elaine. What was the tool method in Clips Open that edits splits comic frames again? I missed that part too.
The tool that edits frames in Clip Studio Paint? Yes, so that one, the thing that makes this a little hard to demonstrate is that there are so many menus. So here, you can see here in the menu on the sidebar, we have the create frame border tool. I think I've customized my shortcuts, so I don't know how helpful this will be, but it's the U key in my Clip Studio. So if that's the default shortcut, you can hit U and it'll bring you to the create frame border tool. If you want the cut frame border tool, for me, that is nested in the subtool menu next to the create frame tool. So you can see here all the different types of frames. There's a second submenu over here that's the cut frame border tool. And you can see here, there's two different options. I actually didn't go over this in the talk, but in option number 1, this divide frame border tool separates out the existing panel into 2 distinct layer groups. But if you want to keep it in one single layer group, but still cut the panel in half, you can use the second divide frame border tool. And you can see here, this is all still the same layer group. It's just split the frame itself, not the layers. Hopefully that helps.
For sure. And talking about tools, what's the tool that you think helps you to save time and that you will recommend to your younger self when you started using Clip Studio Paint?
Oh, that's a good question. I will say something for people who like to add lots of little finicky details to your work. Let me show you something that has saved me a ton of time, and let me try and do this in under 3 minutes. So in the layer property menu, you have all these different effects. One of them is the border effect. Now, it's currently set to white, and this layer is empty, so you can't see anything. But what the border effect does is, let's turn that off and just draw a shape so you can see what I'm doing. I've drawn a shape here. If you add a border to it, you can see this has added a black border to the whole shape. Now, if you're the sort of person who likes to add lots of little tiny intricate details, I like using a white brush on a layer with a black border, and that allows you to create all these really, like, shoelaces are really easy. And then, you know, let's say you've drawn your shoelaces, there's a little bow, but now you want to color it in. What you can do is, normally you'd have to like lock the, you'd have to keep this a separate layer, you'd have to lock the transparency and then color in the individual bits. That's a huge pain in the butt. What you can also do is take this layer, rasterize it. So now it's a flat image. It no longer, you can see there's no border on it anymore. This is all just one flat layer. If you go into edit and then go into convert brightness to opacity, it will change this into a line art drawing. So it will change the white portions of this layer into transparent portions of this. And the lighter the value is, the more transparent it'll be. So when you convert brightness to opacity, it changes this from the solid white with a black outline to just the black outline. And you can see here, I've locked the transparency and I want to change the line art to red. I just flood fill the layer. This is now a red line art layer. You can make a layer under it, and let me demo for you. This is now just a line art drawing. So this is a great and really easy way to add lots of teeny tiny little details to your work. Obviously, this looks crazy when I've blown it up really big, but you can imagine how if you zoom out a lot, this is a great way to add little tiny details to the lace in someone's outfit. You can add like individual hairs to people's hair. It's just the convert brightness to opacity is a fantastic way to convert any black and white drawing to just line art. And similarly, the layer outline function here is a great way to outline little finicky bits of your art. Yeah, that's one of my favorite time-saving tips.
That one was amazing. Thank you so much, Jackie. Our time is limited, unfortunately, and I just want to leave you just last minute for any thoughts or suggestion or tips to our audience about the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the real takeaway here is I think having a positive relationship with your art is a really good, healthy habit to practice. And I hope you all can even, I know, you know, we're all our own worst critics. I think if we all practice telling our internal critic to shut up, the more practice we get doing that, the more of a long-term positive relationship we can maintain with our art. So yeah, that's the takeaway I'd like everyone to have from this talk is think positively about your stuff.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for this amazing webinar. People send me a lot of love through the chat of the question panel. For example, Yusikra, thank you so much, very much for the webinar. It was really great. Kimberly said, thank you for this webinar. Jackie, I learned so much from this.
Thank you
Colin
guys for
said,
coming.
thank you for this great webinar, especially the use of 3D models and textures was great. Yeah, thank Natalie, thank Eric, James, etc. Everybody who is writing right now. So I just want to share one last bit of information before we go. Many of you have asked if this webinar is being recorded or where we'll storage the webinar. It's going to be in our YouTube channel, so please subscribe to Graphicsly on YouTube. You'll receive a notification once the video is available to watch. Also, don't forget to follow or subscribe to Clip Studio Paint channel on YouTube. More information, go to our website or clipstudio.net/n or Graphicsly. And don't forget to follow Jackie on her socials. She's on Instagram, X, this Tumblr, hey, it's Jackie Tross on TikTok, the other social, I forgot right now, and her website. the icon designed by Jackie. So thank you once again, Jackie, for this amazing presentation.
And thank you so much for organizing. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks everyone. This is the last webinar of 2025. Thank all of you who follow us monthly or weekly in our different webinars. So stay tuned on Graphicsly socials for the coming webinars of 2026. Thank you so much also all of you who are, I saw some names that repeats every webinar. So we really appreciate, and we also want to bring you the best artists and share their creative workflows, processes, experiences, etc. So if you have any suggestion, just write us in our socials if you want to see somebody next year. So once again, thank you so much and stay tuned. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.